Hey guys, what's going on? It is me, your host, Shanerator, and welcome to Down the Rabbit Hole, an edutainment series where we take a topic that I'm not too familiar with and attempt to dissect it into its component parts and sort of, break it down. We are going to attempt to dissect electricity, and Lord knows that is a subject that can take many videos to get into. Now, we aren't going to break down electricity because that is way too big for the sake of this video, but what I'd like to do is kind of dive into some of its subsets, namely things like amps, ohms, voltage, subsets of electricity that we've seen on things like plugs and other items, but what do they mean exactly? I don't know, and that is why we are doing this video. Why is it that I don't feel like I'm ever burpy until I'm actually recording a video?
Did you say that you were going to Italy?
But these are terms that I've seen for many years, but never really understood. Like, what's the difference between volts or an amp? That is a question I hope we can answer today on this week's episode of Down the Rabbit Hole. All right, pop quiz time. Who is that close confidant we go to in times of dire distress, like now, where we have a burning question that we just don't have the answer to? Let me give you a hint. It rhymes with boogle. Okay, so to set the stage, what I think we want to do, even though I totally said we're not going to do this. Now, we aren't going to break down electricity. It's actually go into just a little bit of what electricity is before we dive into some of those disparate elements that I brought up earlier. So let us ask the fundamental question. Just what is electricity? Frick. The dictionary definition defines it as a form of energy resulting from the existence of charged particles, such as electrons or protons, either statically as an accumulation of charge or dynamically as a current. So then we have to ask ourselves the question, what is electricity in simple words? And that is where other good confidant comes in to help answer this question, Wikipedia. And here they say electricity is the presence and flow of electric charge. Its best known form is the flow of electrons through conductors such as copper wires. Now, listen, I think I understand what they're talking about, but if you're like me and you're still a little confused, maybe a video will help. Whoops, wrong video. Let's utilize our same Google search into YouTube. And there's a number of videos here, and I want something quick and easy, especially for videos where I want them to explain it like I'm 5.
Today we'll learn about electricity. Visualize a different world where you couldn't turn on a light, a computer, or even use the electric kettle to make your favorite hot chocolate drink.
They lost me. I am literally incapable of imagining that.
Electricity operates our lights, runs our refrigerators, kitchen appliances, and powers motors. So electricity is very much important to all of us. Let's remember the definition of electricity.
Hopefully it's simpler than Google's.
Electricity is a type of energy that can build up in one place or flow from one place to another place. Let's first learn the most popular way to generate electricity.
Okay, I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say that it's actually hamsters and little spinning wheels.
We get the electricity by simply changing other forms of energy.
Wasn't exactly my first guess, but there is a tube with a spinning wheel, which we could easily put a hamster in.
There are two types of electricity, static and current. Let's study about these one by one.
Let's not. I'm sure static electricity is fascinating, but I think we have as much information as we need. So let's recap before moving on. So my layman's super dumbed down version of electricity is that it's a form of energy that is transposed or changed into a different form. Such as in the case they name dropped, like burning coal, which takes that kinetic energy and changes it into electrical energy, which we use to power up devices in our house, for instance. So that, to me, I think makes sense, thank God for videos like this, and gives us at least a tenuous foundation to build on in terms of defining things like amps, voltage, ohms, and all of that stuff. So we're now back to our secondary friend, Wikipedia, because in the classic Maslow's hierarchy of needs in terms of friends, you've got Google at the top, closely followed by Wikipedia, as we have emphasized at the beginning of the video. So I think the best way to handle this is to just go for the direct approach and just ask the question straight up. So what is the difference between... One thing I just love doing is looking at the drop-down options that Google gives you for suggestions, such as classic philosophical questions like, what is the difference between a llama and an alpaca?
That is the question which preoccupies our people, Captain Kirk.
We gotta find out what this is. Britannica says, the most distinguishing physical differences between alpacas and llamas are their size, their hair, and their face shapes. Also, they differ in disposition, which affects the way humans have used them over the years. No, duh. Listen, different dispositions indicate different moods. If a llama and or alpaca is really disgruntled and doesn't want to work with you, you're not going to use him. Or if one of them was a little more amicable and, say, had the disposition of, say, Tom Hiddleston, then yeah, it's going to affect the way you interact with them over the years. I just thought that was really interesting. Oh yeah, so, electricity. Okay, so I went in and typed out, okay, sorry, there's just like this glare in my face from someone's freaking Toyota RAV down there. Listen, Todd, I know you love parking your car, but if it blinds me, then I feel like you should just not. So there. So as I regained my vision, I typed in the difference between amps and volts and watts. It says right here at the top that watts refer to real power, while volts, volts, amperes refer to apparent power. So on the surface, that makes no sense. So based on information, I would elect, with my humble vote of 1, that we go to a site like How Stuff Works that is a little less technical. So much of our daily lives runs on electricity, which we know, yet most of us don't know the difference between a 60 watt and a 75 watt light bulb, or how much voltage from the wall socket supplies enough juice to run both a small desk lamp and a powerful microwave. For the first time in forever, we've actually found a site that we can resonate with. Maybe a lot of you are like actually established electricians, I don't know, and you're watching this being like, how awful can humanity be when it comes to ignorance of electricity? Well, we've hit a new low, but hopefully I can turn that all around with just a little bit of a dose of comedy. But looking ahead to the next paragraph or two, we can see that it's already asking questions that I had originally posed at the beginning of the video, which is talking about the difference between the 3 most basic units, volts, amps, and ohms. They proceed to talk about the neat analogy to help understand these terms in a system of plumbing pipes. Okay, so the implication of the series is that we are researching a topic that I know very little of or have never researched before. And this here paragraph pertaining to the analogy of plumbing pipes has unlocked a core memory. Because I totally remember seeing this question posed on like Reddit or something, and I believe that I did read it, but it didn't quite gel, obviously, because I decided to do a video because I don't remember how the heck this applies. So I don't know why I'm confessing that. I'm guessing in some weird way, maybe this kind of like just, I don't know, inspired an apologetic feeling within me. So, I'm sorry. But in essence, the 3 most basic units of electricity are volts, amps, and ohms. And they said that the voltage is equivalent to the water pressure, the current, which is amps, is equivalent to the flow rate, and the resistance, which is ohms, is like the pipe size. Confused yet? So that is quite a bit to take in. Almost like drinking from a fire hose, to use another water analogy. And apparently, there is an equation that helps us all grok this. The current is equal to the voltage divided by the resistance, or I equals V divided by R. This is known as Ohm's law. And one of the more interesting aspects about this is the history behind Ohm's law, because this stems from principles taught by William Ohm, who used to be a cowboy / water researcher in the northern regions of Missouri back in the early 1800s. And if memory serves, basically, if you messed with his governance, you would actually be sent up the river with a high flow rate or water pressure, which is where Ohm's law comes from. Actually, none of that is true. Let's say you have a tank of pressurized water connected to a hose that you are using to water the garden. So what happens when you increase the pressure in the tank? You can guess that this makes more water come out of the hose. The same is true of an electrical system. Increasing the voltage will make more current flow. Okay, so trying to process all of this. Voltage is equivalent to water pressure. Hence, if you increase the water pressure, aka voltage, this makes more water come out of the hose. Still tracking. So basically, if you increase the voltage, then you have more current flow or higher pressure. All right, we locked 1 down, 2 more to go. And it looks like in this paragraph alone, they did a bit of a twofer. That is, they tackled both amps and ohms in one. The current, aka amps, is equivalent to the flow rate, and the resistance, aka ohms, is like the pipe size. And both these sort of interact with each other in a very similar way, depending on aspects like the pipe size, which can directly affect the flow rate. Woo! But I have a slightly better understanding of these 3 thanks to this article. I think it's phrased a little strangely. What they really need to do for this article is have like an overlay or something with like a map and a key, or like a link chart that connects these terms with the proper analogy. That optical demonstration would cure so many world problems, including world peace and me not knowing the difference between these simple electricity terms. Okay, so based off this one article, we went over a high level of what the difference is between volts, amps, and ohms, but they bring up one other term, which is watts. Now, another philosophical question is,
What the hell is a gigawatt?
and thank goodness our good old friends at How Stuff Works has got us covered with another water analogy. Yay. And they talk about a water wheel, essentially, where in essence you have a hose of water coming out of it, and he pointed at like one of those water wheels, like the ones in... But the idea here is that water's coming out of the hose, and you put it onto the water wheel, and you can affect the power one out of two ways. The first way is by increasing the water pressure coming out of the hose and onto the water wheel, which we determined is... volts, because if you increase the water pressure as it hits the wheel, it causes it to spin faster. So that's the first way. The second way you can generate power using this water wheel analogy is by increasing the flow rate. That is the volume of water coming out of the hose. And because there's extra water coming out of the hose and onto the water wheel, it turns faster because it's heavier. But yes, that is watts in a nutshell, how to measure electrical power. Now, if you go down to the rest of this article, do me a favor and get yourself some Advil or Tylenol, because there's a lot of mathematical equations here, and I don't think I want to get into this, not even from a comedy perspective, because mathematical equations in of themselves are jokes. I'm kidding. Please don't send the water pressure mafia to get me. So I don't know about you, but I feel like I need a slightly better visual aid to help me understand these concepts a little better. To do that, let us defer back to our Maslow's hierarchy of needs as far as friends go on the internet. So we have Google, Wikipedia, and then YouTube. And let's go with the topmost video that has 2.2 million views. That seems like a good course of action.
So when you get your home energy bill, it lists the usage in kilowatt hours. But what do these numbers even mean?
Comedy gold.
Surprisingly, the answer isn't just so appliance companies and physics professors can confuse you.
Why can't it be simple? You know?
You can think of a circuit, kind of like the faucet on your kitchen sink. You need the water itself and some pressure to force it through the pipes, out your faucet, and into your neti pot.
That's
Multiply these numbers and you get the watt.
Why am I even making this video? This guy is already doing it all. He's not only providing a very informative video on electricity in terms of what the difference is between volts, amps, and watts, he's just a freaking comedy genius. I mean, look at this guy. Look at the way that he exudes charisma, even by the way he stares into your soul.
Let's suppose you wanted to spin a small water wheel because
There it
you
is.
just like watching things spin, or I don't know, maybe you have it hooked up to a generator. Let's say you have a really powerful...
Okay, so the whole point of us watching this video is obviously to dissect the difference between volts, amps, and watts. But there is so much to dive into besides that. Like, low-key, I'd love to be a part of a water gun fight like this. Maybe that should be the next video, is diving into why super soaker conventions are no longer a thing. But maybe they should be a thing. I mean, isn't that the point of this video series? To ask important questions?
But suppose instead of a water gun, you have a much wider hose.
These analogies are so freaking close that I am fully convinced that our comedic hypnotic host also authored the How Stuff Works article we looked at just a few minutes ago. Either that or there's like no good analogies for this.
Some simple math tells you that 10 amps of current is running through your power supply. But if you take that same power supply and use it with a 220 volt European outlet, you're only drawing 5 amps.
To quote a famous comedian slash hypnotist, what? Maybe the ohms of my brain wires aren't wide enough to really grok what's going on here. I'm thinking I might have to do a little more research after this video to fully understand the conversion rates between the two. I feel like even though this is the most viewed video, it has done little to clarify the sort of muddy concepts as it relates to electricity and amps and ohms and all that stuff. Am I alone? Let's see. I'm so curious. This guy's top comment. I watch this video every 3 months just to make sure I don't forget the topic. Listen, man, I'm right there with you. As someone who failed chemistry, this answered about 4 questions and raised about 16. Not gonna lie, this was hella confusing. Based off these few top comments, I'm not alone in this. So if there is a takeaway from all of this stuff related to electricity, It's this. Don't try to understand it. It's a futile endeavor. No one gets it. Literally no one, based off our sampling size of 5 or so comments from this one YouTube video. But in all seriousness, this is a fascinating topic that I think requires a part 2, part 3, maybe a part 54, because there is so much that goes into electricity and its component parts. But when has anything interesting ever been simple? Well, that's going to do it for this episode, you guys. But until next time, I hope you guys have a very electrifying rest of your day and one that is just filled with energy.